Francisco Lindor and Carlos Carrasco on their way to the New York Mets for Andres Jimenez and also Ahmed Rosario, and then a couple of prospects, right-handed pitcher Josh Wolf and outfielder Isaiah Green. Joel, I'm going to start with you. Mets fans have to be thrilled.
Yeah, you know what Met fans want is they wanted differentiation from previous ownership. The belief that the Mets had entered the heavyweight category when it came to acquisition, that they would be in every category. Now, to be fair to the previous ownership, the Wilpons, they had ventured into this area before. I guess the one difference we can make here is this feels like the beginning of the beginning instead of the statement that is being made by the Mets. We're getting this. I imagine they're not done shopping this offseason, and I believe that Lindor will ultimately, like Mookie Betts, this is very much the Mookie Betts trade. Mookie Betts at age 27 last year was traded before his walk year to the Red Sox, and before the belated season began, he signed a 12-year, I think, $365 million contract. I suspect at some point we will hear that the Mets and Lindor are going to do. There's no reason to trade for this player and not stay with him long term, especially since you gave up 2 shortstops in the trade. So it feels like the beginning of the beginning instead of the one and only statement the Mets will be making anytime soon under Steve Cohen, Jared Porter, and Sandy Alderman.
And Sarah, we'll get to all, the accolades and how great he is as a baseball player, but the smile. The swag. He's one of the top 3, 4, 5 players in all of baseball. When you add in the marketability coming to New York City, this is a huge win for the Mets.
Absolutely. Even taking away the top 5 player, and all of those accolades, as you said, he's just so exciting to watch. He's so electric. And the Mets already have a really great clubhouse and a really great group of guys. And to add someone like that, and the fact that he is Puerto Rican and all of that, just all coming together in New York is so exciting to think about. And I agree with Joel. It does seem like they would try to keep him long term. I don't think that the Mets now, with all of this money, are going to be making a trade like that and not hold on to the player. So the fact that they can start to plan further with him potentially in that infield is really exciting to think about.
And what kind of a statement does this make, Dave, in New York?
Well, I have to
with
tell
the
you.
Yankees across town.
So my dad grew up in Queens.
Okay.
In Corona, actually, right across from the old Shea Stadium. All of my brothers and sisters, 7 of them, are dancing in the streets right now. My nieces and nephews are going crazy. To me, this is maybe the biggest it's not a free agent sign. I think that he'll eventually sign there. But the biggest trade, I think, almost in Mets history. I have to go back to maybe Gary Carter, maybe Mike
Piazza, yeah 20 years ago.
But this is, to me, a top 10 player. He is going to be the face of this franchise. I think this is an absolute coup by the New York Mets. And by the way, don't sleep on Carlos Carrasco.
Yeah, no, we're going to get to him. Yeah,
we just kind of threw him in the deal.
No, well, we want to go big picture first, so we will get to Carlos Carrasco. But first up, let's welcome in Anthony Dicomo, who covers the Mets for MLB.com. And Anthony, all right, so give us the particulars of the deal. How did this all go down here as we got to Lindor and Carrasco coming to New York, and then Rosario and Jimenez and a couple of prospects on their way to Cleveland? How did Jared Porter, Steve Cohen and company get this deal done?
As Joel mentioned, there was a real appetite here to make a statement, to make a big splash. And there were only so many players out there that could do it. You could do it with potentially Nolan Arenado. You could do it maybe with George Springer or a Trevor Bauer signing. But this was the biggest one of them all, in my opinion. Francisco Lindor, for all the reasons you guys maybe a top 5 player in the game, certainly one of the most marketable players in the game, a guy who this fan base can really wrap their brains around and embrace and love. And if he does wind up staying here long term, all the better. So this was a statement that the Mets wanted to make, and they made it in a big way today.
So what does this also mean when you talk about the Carlos Carrasco? I know the Mets are looking to shore up their starting rotation. Does he fit in nicely as a number 2 starter behind DeGrom?
Absolutely. You've got Jacob DeGrom obviously up top, and then you've got now Carlos Carrasco and Marcus Stroman as your 2-3, however you want to order them. Rotation, which was, let's be honest, a real problem area for the Mets last season, is looking a lot better. And they could still potentially add to it. You do have some uncertainty at the back end of the rotation, but they have options now. They're not forced into a spot where they have to get into a bidding war for free agents. This To me, as good of a player as Francisco Lindor is, the Carlos Carrasco piece is almost just as impactful because of the roster hole that they had, the need that they had. Carlos Carrasco sliding in there is such a big thing for the Mets because they needed pitching in a bad way.
All right, and we heard Joel earlier say they may not be done. I mean, is that a possibility? I mean, could they still go out and add here? There's still some pretty big names on the market. What's the likelihood that maybe Trevor Bauer or George Springer would join the Mets, or would it be more of a complimentary part?
Look, I think there's still definitely and we're going to hear from Sandy Alderson and Jared Porter in about an hour here, and they can break it down even further. But I think there's still a very good chance that the Mets shop around either for another starting pitcher, maybe another back-end reliever, or even continue shopping in that George Springer aisle, because there are still improvements to be made here. You can shore up center field, make that more of a strength than it is. You can turn that rotation into a really good front three, into maybe a really good front four. So there are things the Mets can do, and they have money to play with. Steve Cohen has been clear. He said in an interview with the New York Post that he didn't want to go over the luxury tax, $210 million, but the Mets aren't there yet. They still have some money they can play with. They have deals they can make. So yeah, I would almost be surprised if the Mets don't add to what they have already the rest of this offseason.
All right, great info from Anthony Dicomo. And Anthony, we'll let you get back to work here on a huge day for the Mets and the Mets organization. Joel, let's talk about Carlos Carrasco. Dealt with the leukemia scare back in 2019, came back at the end of the year, and then had a really nice 2020. What are the Mets getting in a pitcher of Carlos Carrasco's stature?
Well, again, like Lindor, reputation as a great guy, a history as and no worse than kind of like a solid 3, and the Mets could certainly use that. I wouldn't sleep on this fact. Most teams would shy away from Carrasco and say, oh, he's also signed through 2022. Well, the Mets at the end of this season, Stroman, Syndergaard, and Matz are all free agents. The Mets obviously are focused on 2021, but they can't punt the future. So now you know behind DeGrom you have Carrasco moving forward and David Peterson. And I will say that by solidifying the rotation a little bit here, and maybe more than a little bit, I think this puts them in position, if they like what they see with, say, Corey Kluber on January 13th when he has his showcase. Now, if you like it, it's like a luxury, right? He's probably not a guy who's going to cost a ton of money. It's probably a low base with incentives. You could bring him in. If he's anything close to Corey Kluber, now you have like a co-number 1 with DeGrom, and you push everyone down. If not, you're just going with the guys. It's what the money of Cone allows. People always think the top of the market, Lindor, Springer, but this allows fringe benefits. It allows you to do anything, and I think it makes that kind of move more interesting.
Wow, I mean, Sarah, the rest of the NL East saying uncle here. Hearing Joel talking about Corey Kluber potentially, or someone of that caliber joining this staff as well. Where does this put the Mets now? As we know it, with all the teams, there's still plenty of time for plenty of moves to be made. But where does this put the Mets in the NL East?
I do think it really helps the rotation. I agree that it is a depth move, and it does allow them to maybe add another depth move type of guy so that their rotation can be better. Their rotation was very bad last year. Anthony alluded to it. I think they had the 4th worst rotation ERA. So with just this move, I'm not sure that it necessarily would vault them, but adding in Lindor, adding in his defense and everything else, and having that rotation depth, the fact that Noah Syndergaard is going to be back sometime towards the middle of the year, I certainly think they're at least competing up there with the Braves, who have their own questions, have their own pitcher returning from injury with Mike Soroka. But I think that they're certainly back into that conversation, which they haven't necessarily been in for a few years now.
And Dave, look, there's always pressure in New York, but when you add Carrasco, does it take a little bit of the pressure off Syndergaard and also, more importantly, Steven Matz, because Matz is still trying to figure out who he is? Again, there's going to be pressure in New York.
Yeah, I don't know if it's actual pressure for those guys. I think Syndergaard wants to come back because he's looking at free agency coming up. He needs to get back on the mound and show the world that he's healthy. But I love the fact that it's impacting their depth. You cannot win in the major leagues without pitching, and you never have enough pitching. Right. So to add a Carlos Carrasco in this trade, I know we're all excited about Francisco Lindor, but I love Joe's idea about Kluber. Remember, Kluber came from Cleveland. Could you imagine having these two guys recruit Corey and saying, because you get to a place.
You're gonna make Indians fans just start crying out loud now. Right?
But you get to a place in your career when you've made your money. Right. You're kind of towards the end, and who do I want to go play for? I want to go play for a team that has a chance to win. And hey, I got my shortstop and my partner on the mound here. It could be a very easy sale to a guy like Kluber if he's healthy and the Mets like him.